Well, I hope we're picking up where we left off. Some of the videos that I transferred to YouTube didn't work out too well, and I can't check them from my end. Only a student can check it. But anyhow, this should be the next video, all right? And it's about transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide by the blood, all right? And there's a certain amount that you need to know about what you see here. First of all, you should know that the blood is broken down into two parts, all right? And you can see the plasma is 55% and the cellular elements 45%. So roughly 50-50, all right? But it's very important to understand the constituents of this blood, all right? First of all, the plasma is basically made of water, all right? And you can say that's the solvent. And here it does tell you it is a solvent for carrying other substances. So everything that you want to get somewhere in the body must go in the blood. And that includes CO2, oxygen, vitamins, sugar, hormones, you name it. So let's take a look at that, all right? So the plasma, that's really the focus of this lecture, by the way, all right? We already talked about the fact that it contains water, all right? And most of it is water. But dissolved in that water are ions, all right? Also known as blood electrolytes, such as sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, chloride, bicarbonate. All of these are ions, all right? And they allow for osmotic balance. By now you should understand osmosis, all right? pH buffering, we went over the pH table, so you should understand how we buffer pH. And maintaining an ion concentration of interstitial fluid, which we haven't talked about interstitial fluid yet, but we will. It's the fluid in between tissues, all right? All right. It also contains the plasma proteins, all right, such as fibrogen, immunoglobulins, and those are antibodies, all right? More osmotic balance for pH buffering, because remember, plasma proteins are large, and remember when we talked about osmotic pressure, we said how these large molecules can pull actually the solvent, all right? Blood clotting and defense, and everything else basically. Substances transported by the blood are the nutrients, such as the glucose, the fatty acids, the vitamins, the waste products that you want to get to every part of the body so they can be disposed, all right? Respiratory gases, especially oxygen and CO2, and hormones. However, most of the O2 and the CO2, all right, is carried by the erythrocytes or red blood cells that you see here, all right? So this is really what transports our oxygen and carbon dioxide. The leukocytes, basophils, eosinophils, neutrophils, monocytes, lymphocytes, platelets, I'm not going to be concerned about that on your exam. You'll have plenty of time to learn about that, but you should know the constituents of blood. The majority, 98% of oxygen in the blood is carried by hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is part of this one red blood cell, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. Red blood cells are filled with hemoglobin. That means it contains an iron, all right? So let's go to the next slide. Nope, wrong computer. I have two computers set up. If I can find it. Okay, so now we can take a look at the hemoglobin. All right, there's probably a question on your exam about hemoglobin. All right, it consists of 4 polypeptide chains, which means it's a quaternary protein, and it's got what is called a heme group containing iron. And here you can see the iron, and it's got 4 of them, right? 4 iron atoms, and that is what actually holds onto the oxygen. So when it gives up all of its oxygen, this is a red blood cell, by the way, when it gives up all of its oxygen, we say that the O2 is unloaded into the tissue, and then it will go back to the lungs and pick up and become loaded again when we breathe in fresh air into our lungs, and those red blood cells will then pick up the oxygen, all right? So a heme group contains iron and combined 4 oxygen molecules. As you can see, here it is unloaded, but here are the 4 irons, and here are the 4 oxygens it can carry. So each hemoglobin molecule, or each red blood cell, or each erythrocyte can carry 4 oxygen molecules. All right. Hemoglobin can also bind to carbon dioxide. That's another whole story for transport, or hydrogen ion to help with acid buffering. That's a hydrogen ion. You should recognize that as an acid, and we'll see how we can get rid of acid in a minute. Carbon dioxide dissolves in the plasma. Okay, it combines with water and is converted to carbonic acid. All right. So if you take a look at that, what you're seeing is H2CO3, and if you break that down, you can see that it becomes actually a hydrogen ion, which is the acid, plus the bicarbonate, which basically neutralizes the acid, and that's HCO3. You won't have to memorize them, but you should have the basic concept. Okay? All right, here's another one of those pictures that are pretty redundant. I'm sure I should be able to put one of them on the exam, right? And it's kind of, each diagram is really the same. They're a little redundant, but I think they still make the point, all right? So we're going to talk about capillary blood leaving the lungs, returning to the left atrium. We did this already. So here are the capillaries of the lungs. These are the capillaries that are covering the alveoli, right? The alveoli, again, or alveolus, are those little air sacs that take in fresh air and are responsible for eliminating CO2 as well, all right? So when we take a breath in, all right, we see we have oxygenated blood, which is usually red, and this is the pulmonary circuit. That means that these capillaries basically outline the alveolus, all right? So now we have oxygenated alveoli blood, right? And that's going to travel, right, into the left atrium, all right? And that's sort of like a little pump, and that will pump blood into the left ventricle, and that is also highly oxygenated blood, and most of the pressure will be right here in the aorta, all right? Aorta, oxygenated blood, and that oxygenated blood is delivered to the systemic capillaries. Again, the systemic capillaries, even though they show them down here, that means also the head, the nose, the ears, the toes, every place in the body, right? As these red blood cells give away their oxygen, they pick up CO2, all right? So here we have oxygen-rich CO2 poor blood, and then that winds up becoming CO2-rich oxygen-poor blood as it picks up the waste products of cellular respiration from the systemic cells in the body. All right, that blood, that CO2-rich blood, is transported to the right atrium. All right, that goes to the right ventricle. Then it travels back to the lungs as low oxygen, high CO2. We take that high CO2 because of its concentration gradient, right? We can exhale that out from high concentration to low concentration, and then now we can pick up fresh oxygen from high concentration to low concentration, oxygenate the capillaries, and start the process over again, all right? So, capillary blood leaving the lungs returns to the left atrium of the heart. You can follow this yourself now. It's pumped to the left ventricle, then out to the body system. Oxygen diffuses out of the capillaries, as you can see here, all right, to the tissue cells, and here they are. Carbon dioxide diffuses out of the tissue, and here it is here. Carbon dioxide coming out of the tissue and into the blood and returning to the heart and the lungs. All right. The circulatory system is an internal transport system responsible for transporting respiratory gases, which is CO2 and oxygen, distribution of nutrients and hormones, because they are all located in the blood, as you've seen in the previous slide, all right, delivery of waste, which is also in the blood, all right, products to disposal sites, all right, and regulation of temperature and blood clotting, which is part of homeostasis, which I know I put 1 or 2 questions on the exam. That is to say, our blood has a certain temperature. And if, for example, we were to make our extremities so that they are open to the atmosphere, we would give off all of our warmth that's in the blood to the atmosphere, and we would lose heat. If we wanted to conserve heat, which we're going to see later on, well, then what we could do is we can close up and for example, make our hands smaller. We could roll into a ball, and then we'd have less surface area, and we would conserve heat that way. So we're going to talk more about that in a few minutes. All right, we're still on the circulatory system. We're still on the same picture. All right. So the circulatory system consists of a heart and 2 separate networks of blood vessels. Here we are with the same picture again. All right, we have the pulmonary circulation, which you should be able to recognize by now. All right, carries blood between the heart, all right, and the lungs. Heart and the lungs. All right. Venous blood, which is oxygen poor from the body, returns to the right atrium, as you can see here. All right. And that's pumped to the right ventricle, which you can see here, all right? And then it goes through the pulmonary artery back to the lungs, where diffusion will occur again of respiratory gases, all right? Now, systemic circulation, which is down here, all right? That's where we're going to take the oxygen-rich blood, all right, and feed it to all of the cells in the systemic or whole system, all right? It carries blood between the heart and the body tissue. And this would be the body tissue. That would even be the brain, even though it's down here. Okay. Blood O2 rich returns to the left atrium. Okay. And then left ventricle and then the aorta. All right. Body tissue where oxygen diffuses out to the tissue and carbon dioxide diffuses into the blood, and then it all returns to the heart. You should actually take a few minutes and just follow this, and that'll get you through a couple of questions on your exam. Your final exam is pretty long, by the way. Okay. This is an interesting topic, all right? And what we're really going to start looking at are the arteries, arterioles, all right, the capillaries, and then the venules and the veins, all right? And we want to look at the various types of tissue that we talked about earlier. A few slides ago, we were talking about tissue, right? So I'd like to start off with actually the capillaries, all right? The capillaries are very numerous. Here they are here, all right? And they're very thin-walled vessels, and the reason they're thin-walled vessels is because we need to diffuse oxygen across these vessels, right? And they are only 1 cell thick, all right? So because they are only 1 cell thick, it's easier to diffuse from high concentration to low concentration of any gas, all right? So there are numerous thin-walled vessels, and that's what we're talking about. 1 cell thick. As a matter of fact, they are only wide enough to hold 1 red blood cell going through them at a time. They have a large surface area. Surface area that's good, because the larger the surface area, the more we can allow to happen, right? Large surface area with slow flow increases the rate of diffusion. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. Diffusion of any of the respiratory gases only occurs in the capillaries, right? Now here's the artery, right? And let's say, for example, this is the aorta, right? And this is the most highly concentrated oxygen supply vessel in the body is right here, okay? So you would wonder, or maybe, or it could be a question, if we have such a high concentration of oxygen here, as you can see, all right, would we be able to diffuse oxygen from high concentration to low concentration? And the answer, real simple, because you're not here, all right, is no, because the barrier is too thick, all right? We have smooth muscle, we have epithelium, we have connective tissue, and you can see how thick that is. That is to say, because the thickness of the barrier would not promote diffusion, whereas the thickness of the barrier here, all right, in the capillaries, which is only 1 cell thick, we would have diffusion. So let's take a look at the capillaries again. Numerous thin-walled vessels, large surface area, all right, with slow flow, and that's important because you don't want a red blood cell to go shooting past the cell that it has to deliver oxygen to and pick up CO2. You want it to move very slowly, all right, so it'll have time to do that, all right? And diffusion only occurs in capillaries, all right? Now let's get over to the arteries, the blood vessels that exit the heart. Very high concentration of oxygen in there. They have a thicker, smooth muscle layer to constrict them and increase blood pressure, all right? So if you want to increase the blood pressure, your smooth muscle, which is not under voluntary control, it's under involuntary control, can actually squeeze and increase the pressure in the vessel, all right? Some have elastic tissue, and the aorta is one of them, which allows stretch and recoil, all right? And you want that to occur. Remember me telling you maybe about some car accidents where a seatbelt has actually ruptured the artery, all right? Simply because it doesn't have enough movement. They're very stiff sometimes, all right? So we want to be able to allow them to stretch and recoil. And one example given is the aorta, so it does not break, all right? Then we get into finally veins, all right? And now we're going to be bringing back to the body CO2-rich blood and oxygen-poor blood, all right? But what's important to understand here is these veins, they actually help the heart out. They're almost like a separate pump because what happens is the muscles, for example, in your legs and arms will push on this vein. It will push on the vein. And when it does that, it pushes the blood that's going to be going back to the heart, all right? It almost pushes it as if it's a pump, all right? And there's valves in here so that if the blood tries to go back in the other direction, this will close. So this is actually another pump that assists the heart. All right, so keep that in mind as well. All right, let me move on to the next slide. Might be the last one, I think it is. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about the heart. You know, I made the final exam. It's got a lot of questions on it, and it's going to take you a while, but I think you'll get through it pretty easy because I kept the questions pretty basic, all right? So if you go back to the other picture we have the heart. It consists of 4 chambers, 2 atrium, 2 ventricles, all right? And here it is here, all right? Then we have the cardiac cycle, something you should know about. I'm pretty sure I have this on the exam. You have systolic and diastolic pressure, all right? The systolic pressure is when the ventricles contract, and that's the pressure pushing against the vascular system in your body. So, of course, the more fat you have on your body, the more vessels you have, and the more pressure it takes to push against those vessels. So, and the diastolic pressure is when the ventricles are relaxed and the heart is refilling. So one is when the heart is refilling, the other one is when it's pushing the blood out. All right. Cardiac muscle cells are connected by what are called gap junctions. These are electrical junctions. All right. They allow the whole entire heart muscle to be stimulated and contract at the same time. Now, for everybody that's going into nursing, that's really important. Because if the heart does not contract exactly at the same time, you are in cardiac arrest. All right. So let me just give you a quick showdown on that. Okay. All right. So I have a question about the SI node or sinoatrial node, right? And that is over here, right? It's over here where you see it's in yellow right now. It's called the pacemaker of the heart, the SA node. And there's a question on your exam about it. So make sure you pay attention to this. It's also called the pacemaker of the heart. Electrical signals spread from the SA node, and that's what you're seeing here in the yellow. That's the actual electrical signal. This is showing you in a waveform when it's beginning to be generated, what it would look like when both atrium are electrified. You can see it here, all right? All right, as the electricity leaves and goes down these branches, all right, to the apex of the heart. That's what that part of that signal is there. And then when both muscles, left and right side of the heart, contract because they're electrically activated, that's where you see this line right here. All right. So electrical signals spread from the SA node through the atrium. This is what gives you your basic heart rate. And that might be about 40 or 50 beats per minute. Not enough to get up out of bed and run around, but it keeps you alive, right? That's your basal heart rate, all right? Okay. The AV node, all right, and AV bundles are a conducting system. That's what you're seeing in here. The AV node and then all these branches or bundles, they actually conduct electricity, all right? The electrical signals then spread through both ventricles, and that's what you're seeing here, all right? Spreading through both ventricles, causing the contraction right here of both ventricles at the same time. These electrical signals can be detected from the surface of the skin with an EKG monitor, all right? And you're not going to have to memorize any of these patterns, all right, at all on your exam, but you should be familiar with some of the parts or some of the anatomy of the heart, like, for example, the SA node, the sinoatrial node, what it does, the pacemaker, etc. All right, trying to make this pretty simple for you, given for what we have to work with nowadays. It's not so good. Okay, a little bit more about blood pressure, and then we're going to stop it here. Okay, blood pressure, very important. The numbers you don't have to memorize, but the reality is, if you don't memorize, you should at least understand what's going on. All right, here we're talking about pressure in millimeters of mercury. All right, and here we're talking about the velocity in centimeters per second of a red blood cell going through one of these vessels. All right. Now here you can see at the aorta relatively where we have a lot of blood coming out at once, right? If you went up here, you can see the pressure is actually pretty high. And you can see the velocity of the blood, that is to say how fast it's moving. And when I say the blood, I mean the red blood cells. It's moving pretty fast in centimeters per second, right? As we branch out into arterioles, of course the pressure should drop, and it does. You can see it dropping down in here. Our pressure has dropped, and you should see that as well. And as in the arterioles, we see now what's happening is the velocity of the blood itself is starting to slow down. That means the blood is traveling, was traveling pretty fast here, but over here we're seeing that the blood is traveling pretty slow. And that relates back to what I just told you a few minutes ago. The red blood cells have to travel slow. They're carrying oxygen that has to be delivered to a cell in the body, and they also need to be going slow enough to pick up the waste product of cellular respiration, which is CO2. And now you can see that in the capillaries themselves, all right, in the capillaries themselves, we have a little bit of blood pressure, but look how slow. In reality, I don't even know if this is correct, but according to this, the velocity of the red blood cells in the capillaries is zero. It's not even moving. That means that red blood cell, right, has to go past a cell, deliver oxygen, have enough time then to, as it's moving, pick up CO2 and then bring that back, all right, to the lungs, all right. So you don't have to memorize these numbers, but you should understand this concept, all right? All right. So blood pressure is the force per unit area measured in millimeters of mercury. That's something you should look up. I usually have it on my exams, all right? That blood exerts on the blood vessels. It's created by the pumping action of the heart, that is to say, the pump of the heart. Resistance to blood flowing through the blood vessels increases the pressure that is needed, all right, for the heart to push blood up against those vessels. Now, textbook blood pressure, you do not have to know, all right, because they change the textbooks all the time, and what's in one book might not be in the other. It really goes by the doctor, all right? Every doctor has a different value for what's high blood pressure, for what's low blood pressure. It depends on the age of the individual, the gender, and a lot of other things, all right? It's measured indirectly with what is called a sphygmomanometer. That's called a blood pressure cuff, all right? Pressure decreases as blood flows through the circulation. As you can see, the pressure will decrease. All right. The aorta and arteries are the same as the heart. All right. Arterioles down to 60. You don't need to memorize these numbers, but you should look at and see what's going on. That's the point. All right. Why does this have to slow down to almost a standstill? Why? All right. So that's what you want to look at. This next picture shows you what I was showing you a few minutes ago with veins. All right. And here you can see, for example, blood flow, and obviously the blue means it's high CO2, low oxygen, right? And this is returning back to the heart, all right? And here are our skeletal muscles. They could be our legs or arms, etc. And what they do is they actually push when we move. When we move, they actually push on the veins. And when they push on the veins, that actually makes the area in here or volume smaller, so the blood has to move, right? And it can only move in one direction, because if it tries to move down in this direction, this valve is closed. So it has to move in this direction, and that valve will be open. So this is actually a pump, all right, to assist the heart, all right? Muscles contracting in the leg help move blood back to the heart. Pressure causes filtration in the capillaries. That's important, all right, because this pressure, what it does is it causes what is called filtration. Filtration of the blood, all right? And the filtration part is actually, since there are two constituents of blood, all right, the cellular elements are not lost, but the plasma is. So plasma can leak out through the capillaries, and that has to go back into the blood, all right? That's important to remember that. So pressure causes filtration in the capillaries, and that filtration is plasma, all right? That's the watery substance. They're small molecules, so they can actually fit in between capillary cells, because don't forget, the capillaries are only one cell thick, all right? All right? So it can be pushed out into the tissue, and you get what is called edema, all right, which is swelling, all right? So that extra plasma that winds up leaking out because it's being squeezed by leg muscles, all right? All right? It is picked up by the lymphatic system, another part of our plumbing system, all right? And if you have too much fluid, that is called edema or swelling, all right? So it's picked up by the capillaries or the lymphatic system and then brought back into the circulatory system, all right? The next slide I have, again, is the constituents of blood. For you to look at again, all right? You don't need to memorize any of these numbers, but this is just another way of looking at it. You have the plasma, you have the cellular elements, you have this main constituent is water, solvent for carrying all of this, all right? And what these all do, you should know, right? Here's the other substances transported by blood: nutrients, glucose, fatty acids, vitamins, waste products of metabolism, respiratory gases, in both, by the way, okay? So with this, we'll go one more to the lymphatic system, and then we'll call it a night with that. All right? And here's the lymphatic system that I talked about, where the plasma that leaks into the interstitial space, that's the space between the cells and the next cell, all right? All right? Here we see a nice picture of it, all right? Here we can see, for example, tissue cells, all right? Here's the interstitial fluid, that's the fluid in between cells, all right? Here are the capillaries themselves, and sometimes what will happen is some of the plasma will leak into the interstitial fluid and will need to be picked up and brought back to the blood. And what picks that up is the lymphatic capillaries. As you can see, they are in very close proximity, and they can pick up the plasma that leaks out of the capillaries, pick it up, and the same concept going on, where the muscles in your body actually work as pumps. As you can see, here are the valves. So now we also have pumps in the lymphatic system, all right? And the lymphatic system does a lot for us. It's a separate one-way transport system consisting of vessels, but no pumps, all right? But no pump. But actually, it does have a pump, but it doesn't have a physical pump that you can see, like we see with the heart actually contracting and relaxing. This pump is our muscles, all right? It collects the excess tissue that I just spoke about and transports it back to the blood through the left jugular vein, okay? The lymph fluid is moved by body movement, as you can see, because of these valves, all right? And vessels, smooth muscle contraction. So don't forget, smooth muscle is under involuntary control, and when you squeeze smooth muscle, it's going to push a solvent in a certain direction, all right? Lymph nodes, however, filter the lymph, and that's that lymph fluid, and house white blood cells. White blood cells fight basically infection or disease, all right? All right? Such as lymphocytes, all right? Which respond to infection and cancer, all right? And it transports the absorbed fat from the small intestine, all right, to the bloodstream as well. So those are things that you might want to kind of just stick into the back of your head. And I think at this point, we'll stop until we do thermoregulation. So just give me a second to shut the camera, and once I do that, we stop.